Oh, hi. I don't have a very funny intro skit for the start of this video because my idea-making skills are in the same vein as retrying a shitty mobile game. You need to cough up some cash before I can keep going. Welcome to the second episode of Halloween.
Now, after my last video, you may remember I talked a little bit about the developer of the original Resident Evil Survivor, a company called Tosei. Well, you see, in that video I mentioned how this company was responsible for helping co-develop a bunch of different other games, along with games still a part of the Resident Evil series. I obviously made fun of Resident Evil 0 because I'm gonna be completely honest with you here. I do not like this game. Maybe a full video as to why that is the case in the future, but for now, I want hardcore RE fans to cope and seethe until then. And then, they were involved in making two more Resident Evil games. Now, the most prominent one has got to be Resident Evil Revelations, the one game in this odd time for Capcom and Resident Evil that at the very least gave fans of the more survival horror roots of this franchise something to chew on, while their beloved franchise's main engines got touched by Michael Bay. But you see, glancing on Revelations Wikipedia page, you'll see that Capcom themselves actually made this, so that leaves me to believe that Tosei merely helped out with the development of this project. But the topic of today's video seemed to be their second crack at solely developing another game in this franchise, and that was a little game called Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D.
A game that can really only be played on the console that is the equivalent of a Motorola flip phone from 2002.
Oh, now this one is gonna be a doozy because we've got a bunch of shit to cover here. So I guess I'll start on the console of choice, the Nintendo 3DS. Now this is something that baffles me, but at the same time makes the most amount of sense. But let's start off with what baffles me, starting with the console of choice. Now as we know, Capcom and Nintendo had a pretty strong relationship during the early 2000s, where a lot of Resident Evil games that were released during that time were made exclusive to Nintendo consoles. The games that were released under this umbrella, no pun intended, were Resident Evil 1's remake, Resident Evil 0, and Resident Evil 4 before Capcom saw how shit the sales were and for once made the right decision. But even so, Resident Evil games were still prominently featured on Nintendo platforms like the Nintendo Wii with its port of Resident Evil 4, the ports of the GameCube games under the Resident Evil Archives name, and the Umbrella and Darkside Chronicles, games that I really want to play again. So Capcom deciding on making an entry to this franchise Nintendo exclusive does make a lot of sense when you consider their history. The only thing that confuses me is why make it on an overpriced toaster oven that can run Cooking Mama? Now back in 2010, Nintendo finally released their successor to the Nintendo DS, the Nintendo 3DS, a slightly more powerful handheld with the feature that I guarantee 90% of people stopped using as soon as they turned it on and thought it was neat. But now I do need to ask, where was the sudden interest in putting Resident Evil onto portable consoles starting to come from? This is something that I wondered about even way before starting this video. If you really were to sit down and think about it, Resident Evil never really was a series that starred too frequently on handhelds. If looking at this quick Google search is anything to go off of, there have only ever been a total of 5 games in the series released onto handhelds, if we aren't counting ports or mobile games. And I know with the existence of the Nintendo Switch, portable Resident Evil is pretty much the norm, that is if you don't count these pieces of shit, but the Switch is still a home console first and foremost, so I don't really count that. But on top of why I don't understand the sudden interest in handheld gaming, another thing that confuses me is the console of choice. I don't really think you need to look too far into this because until 2015, it would seem that Nintendo pretty much had the monopoly on the Resident Evil games. Back on the Game Boy Color, there was Resident Evil Gaiden, and in 2007, there was the port of the original Resident Evil on the PS1 called Deadly Silence, which I would also like to make a dedicated video on at some point. But those are pretty much the only games for Resident Evil that filled the portable console space until like 2015 on the PS Vita. Why Capcom decided to completely skip out on the PSP, I will forever have no idea. Maybe it's because you technically could already play the proper PS1 entries into the series by downloading them from the PS Store, but I am not 100% too sure on that. But that's enough of the one reason why it baffles me. Now we need to head over to the game itself. The Mercenaries. You know, the mode. Now, for those of you who don't know, The Mercenaries is a side mode that you can usually unlock after beating a game's main campaign. I always knew that the earliest instance where Resident Evil Mercenaries was featured was back in Resident Evil 3, where I think that's where it was cemented as a staple to the series. But it wasn't until doing some research for this video that I learned that Mercenaries was always something that featured in Resident Evil as far back as the first game, but this time it was only referred to as Extreme Battle Mode. Now, thanks to this video here by the channel called This July, link in the description, this battle mode featured in the original game, but only on the Saturn release, which I find interesting as to why this would be a separate mode that only featured 1 year later on a completely different system. But hey, since I got my Sega Saturn emulator up and running, maybe it's time I take a look at this version to see what Sega fanboys had to deal with. The next instance of this Extreme Battle Mode was in Resident Evil 2, where it's pretty much been a feature in every version of the game, but according to this video, it says DualShock PlayStation. So I'm gonna go off on a whim here and say that this was a mode that released for the DualShock version of Resident Evil 2. And looking at these early versions of the mode, I don't really think that they follow the same structure as the Mercenaries we all know and love today. What it seems like to me in Resident Evil 1's battle mode, it's a stage-by-stage romp where you need to beat all of the stages in the fastest time possible with the arsenal you're provided. And instead of you needing to complete these stages before time runs out, no, time just keeps counting up, so you just need to see how fast you're able to beat every single stage. And it would seem that it's the exact same case in Resident Evil 2, except by the looks of this video I found, it lasts you almost as long as a normal scenario would in the base game's campaign. But it's here in Resident Evil 3 where the Mercenaries really started becoming the thing we know it for today. You pick your character, the stage starts, you have a timer that's constantly running out, and with each kill that you get an additional amount of time added to your timer, so you can continue your undead massacre. I never personally played this version of the Mercenaries before, but old school Resident Evil, just going absolutely apeshit with that classic control style and kill off every single enemy in your way with reckless abandon, sign me the fuck up. I think there's a reason why Dino Crisis 2 followed a more action route. The next time Mercenaries would be featured in a Resident Evil game was in the re-release for Resident Evil Code Veronica, Resident Evil Code Veronica X, and besides the massive leap in graphics, it seems like this follows the exact same structure as Resident Evil 3. But where Mercenaries really set the world ablaze was without a doubt in Resident Evil 4. You pick one of the many stages and characters, kill off waves and waves of Ganados, run around the stage destroying these hourglass things that extend the amount of time you have for each run, and there you go. It's Resident Evil 4 Mercenaries, where your Second Amendment rights can be practiced without limits. And that's pretty much where the Mercenaries was properly cemented as being a part of every single Resident Evil game going forward. I think really the only game that missed out on it was Resident Evil 7, but I could be wrong about that. I guess the only exception to this rule as well is the raid mode featured in the Revelations games, but we'll get into those at some other point. But yes, as you can see, Mercenaries has played an extremely huge part in Resident Evil's history, and it's probably the one mode that you'll spend the most time on after everything is said and done with the main campaign. I know for a fact I did. One of me and my buddy's favorite games to play together on the 360 was Resident Evil 5's Mercenaries, and we had a shit ton of fun. But now getting back on track with the topic of this video, as I'm sure you heard, the Mercenaries has been a mode that you can unlock in every installment to the franchise. But now here we are in 2011 with an entire game based on that single concept. How exactly would you be able to stretch a mode that would probably tops last you 6 minutes to something that's supposed to fill in a gap for at least 3 hours? And on top of that, make it into something that costed money. Well, that leads me into why I think Mercenaries 3D, being something that released exclusively on handhelds, makes a lot more sense. Now, this is something that varies from person to person, but handheld gaming is normally something that a person experiences in short bursts. It's why games like, for example, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker broke up the campaign into different missions, because playing a game that can take anywhere up to 20 hours on such a small screen, yeah, I hope you love fucking up your eyes, because this is a surefire way to do it.
Not me though, because I have something I like to call alternatives. Now you might be thinking to yourself, John, honey, baby, kitten, didn't you say that you don't own any other Nintendo console aside from a Nintendo Wii? How were you able to play this game? Well, let's just say that Nintendo is not going to be very happy with me. Now, before that cease and desist letter inevitably makes its way to my doorstep, I think it's time that we stop wasting time and finally jump into
Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D.
Now, upon starting up, we reach... Haven't actually done one of these in a while. The main menu. And this game actually throws us a curveball because it seems that we don't just get one, but we get two. Woo! Because when we reach the title screen, Killing Floor 2 just finished downloading, we're only given a total of two options. The Mercenaries and options. And since this is basically a damn near launch title for a console that probably wouldn't be able to properly run ball on a Nokia phone, we don't really have a lot to work with here, with the exception of the aim style that can get switched between first and third person. Perhaps Tosei was just feeling a little bit nostalgic. Any case, after selecting the only option that makes sense, we're then thrusted into the next menu, where the real fun shit starts. While you're at this menu, you have a total of 5 options. You can switch your characters if you're still traumatized after what Chris did to that boulder. You can enter the duos mode if you want to play this game in co-op, but bad news,
I don't have any friends.
you can see the amount of medals you got, which is essentially this game's equivalent to achievements. Or if you're anything like me, whenever you hear anything to do with medals, you immediately get thrusted back into watching Dastardly and Muttley's Flying Machine. And then after that, we're allowed to select our missions. And I don't think I need to explain what this big ass button here in the middle means. But if you have the attention span of a TikTok user, which, truth be told, when YouTube starts adding 3-minute shorts, you better start training to focus up, you little shit, this is where we get to start the missions. So upon loading into the first couple of missions, disappointingly enough, these are basically just tutorials which will teach you how to play the game. The first mission makes you run through each of these lit markers to make sure you pass the sobriety exams before getting sent out to war. The next mission teaches you how to use that lead-filled BB gun you constantly have on your person for in case shit hits the fan, and then thankfully by mission 3, you're finally able to rack up your very own body count. I really hate the fact that at the very least 3 of the game's missions are tutorials. I think this should have been relegated to its very own section because now you're essentially wasting all of the fun the player could be having, and for returning veterans like me, you're wasting my time because I've been killing off Ganados since before this game was even a concept. Any case, once that's all out of the way, the game can properly start. And yeah, what can I say? It's Resident Evil's Mercenaries, except this time around it's been put through a hydraulic press so it can work on an overpriced pager. But something that I find incredibly interesting, and I'm pretty sure if you've played enough Resident Evil games in the past, you might actually recognize that the game that Mercenaries 3Ds pulls a lot of assets from. That's right, Mercenaries 3D takes a lot of its settings as well as enemies and character models from Resident Evil 5, which, I mean, makes a lot of sense, right? Since Resident Evil 5 released all the way back in 2008 and 6 wouldn't come out until 1 year later after Mercenaries 3D, it taking a lot of assets from 5 makes a lot of sense. And I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I personally think that Resident Evil 5 probably still has one of the best Mercenaries modes in the entire series. If that is a hot take, then I'm sorry, your opinions are just wrong. But yeah, you'll recognize a lot of these places, like that African village from the start of the game, Shipment from Call of Duty 4, the factory, the mines, where this time around it's thankfully perfectly lit, because if this section was adapted here, it would probably have sold fuck all copies. That weird volcano prison at the end of the game, I think, listen, if I'm not remembering these places by name or where they happen in the game, I haven't touched Resident Evil 5 properly since like 2015, and I can barely remember to feed my own child, so what do you want from me? Case in point, I recognize these places from the Mercenaries mode from 5. I'm not 100% too sure if the structures of the stages have changed at all, if items and shit have been moved around, but still, they are maps that you can play on. But hold your horses, ladies and gentlemen. While Resident Evil 5 was the primary source of inspiration for most of the maps in this game, there are some maps thrown in from Resident Evil 4, like the village as well as the castle, and even some enemies from 4 shows up as well, like the Zealots and the Garradors. So this game somewhat acts like a best of Mercenaries kind of thing, which kind of makes me wonder why the hell we ended up getting this a few years later. Hell, it doesn't only stop with the stages and enemies. Some of the characters are also more from just Resident Evil 5's Mercenaries mode. No, we actually get 2 characters from Resident Evil 4, namely Krauser and Hunk. But most of the characters are from 5, namely Resident Evil 5's Mercenaries Reunion mode, that included characters like Rebecca and Barry. Now, I thought that she would have also been in 5's Reunion mode, but no, it would seem that to my knowledge, this is the first time that Claire was added to a modern Mercenaries mode, so I thought that was kind of interesting. But here's another thing that kind of pisses me off. With 5 clearly being the foundation that this game was built on, Why the fuck only 8 characters? And what I don't understand is the selection of characters that were kept and cut. What I mean is, where the hell is Sheva? Where is Josh? They were in Resident Evil 5, and if we're adding Claire to this game, why the hell not Leon? I mean, Krauser and Hunk are here, so why not the biggest icons of the series? I mean, it is just a personal nitpick. The characters here are still really damn fun to use, and much like Mercenaries tradition, each character will have their own unique loadout that can either give them a certain advantage in one spot and a disadvantage in the other. But before we actually get to talk about the gameplay itself, let's take a look at the more shallow side of the game. The graphics. I'm gonna be deadass here with you. The fact that Resident Evil 5's maps and character models were what was used for the basis of this game? Damn it! For a 3DS game? This looks pretty damn good. Yes, it's obviously not for shit going to look nearly as good as Resident Evil 5 did back on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, but you also need to understand, this is a handheld that is extremely weaker than most of the competition it had up until this point. And I might be 100% wrong here in this instance, but for the village as well as the castle, were these simply just ripped from base Resident Evil 4, or were these recreated from the ground up specifically for this game? They didn't seem too out of place with this game's graphic style, but it's just something that got me wondering, because if that was the case, then would this technically mean that this was the first time these places were remade for a new game, even an entire 5 years before Umbrella Corps would do it? Basically, all in all, you can come to your own conclusion on what you think about the game's visuals. I think it's a technological feat that they were able to get this game looking so good and running this smoothly with the limitations of the handheld. That MT framework mobile thing that Capcom was using around this time, it was really something special, wasn't it? And hell, I think it was even put to better use a year later when Revelations released on the 3DS. But now that the visuals are out of the way, let's finally move over to the gameplay. And I do understand I need to get the elephant out of the room here real quick. As I mentioned, I was emulating this game. Since I've only ever played a Nintendo 3DS at one of those kiosks you'd see at a hardware store for like 5 minutes, I'm pretty sure that I didn't map out all the controls to how the actual system would have them laid out. No, instead I configured the controls to play on my Xbox One controller. And I was almost about to say that the controls are stupid and don't make a lick of sense, but that's when I realized, maybe it's actually my fault for not mapping out the controls according to how the 3DS had it laid out. And that's probably why it felt so weird. But regardless, there are some things that I want to bitch about when it comes to the controls, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Firstly, the game is pretty much one-to-one with Resident Evil 5, but the controls themselves play a lot more like Resident Evil 4. Now what I mean by that is that the game reverts back to the tank controls that was in Resident Evil 4 instead of the dual stick method that was used in Resident Evil 5. You can still do stuff like strafing left to right, but in order to do that, you first need to hit the left shoulder button to lock yourself in place, but you'll be using this method for one of the most important features to this game that I'll get into in a little bit. As for now, the game's controls are laid out like so. You ready your gun with the right shoulder button. Already something that took me a while to get used to, but all in all wasn't too big of a pain in the ass. But it's when you get to the actual face buttons, that's where shit really starts going south. So in order to fire your weapon, you need to hit the Y button. The A button is what you're gonna need to use to heal yourself if you have some green herbs on you. The B button is how you're going to need to reload your weapons. Granted, this fucking sucks because in order to initiate your reload, you first have to be aiming down sights. And sometimes the stupid controls doesn't always register that, so sometimes I'd be spamming that B and shoulder buttons like it was a sex minigame in the old God of War games just to reload my fucking pistol. And the X button is your taunt. Yeah, you get to taunt at the things that want to rip your head off, that probably has no idea what you're saying, nor does it seem like they care. Yeah, you know what, maybe you deserve this. And since we're playing this on the Nintendo 3DS, and since this was a launch title, of course we're going to need to utilize some of the gimmicks of this console now, aren't we? And most of said gimmicks just lie here at the bottom of the screen. But I'm very happy to report that they aren't as intrusive as you might think. Obviously, they're used for menu navigation when you're not in-game, but when you're loaded into missions, it mainly only serves as a way to show you your map at all times, and you can tap on one of the icons that is located next to it in order to quickly select an item that you want to use. use. But the only way how I think that this could be a little bit intrusive is because in order to equip your grenades or proximity mines, you need to click on their icon, whereas you can just use the D-pad to switch to your primary weapons. It's a situation where I wish that you could just switch the item you want by just scrolling through them using the D-pad, almost like, you know, how Resident Evil 5 lets you do it. But besides that one single gripe, I really have no issue with the game's controls, especially when you consider that the game introduced the one thing into the Mercenaries mode that Resident Evil Dead Aim did first for the series, and that is to allow you to move and shoot at the same time. Yes sir, where the game that inspired this one wasn't even able to do that. When you go into your aim mode, you hold down that left shoulder button and you can freely aim and shoot to your heart's content. Why this still wasn't implemented in older games in the first place, I will forever have no idea, but damn it, isn't this a feature that is damn appreciated over here? And that is pretty much it. If you've played the Mercenaries mode before, you'll know exactly what you're getting yourself into when you decide to play this version. You select one of the missions, get loaded into the map said mission takes place in, you run around exploring the map, killing off any and all enemy that stands in your way, finding health and ammo as you go, and destroying these hourglasses and finding these hourglasses in chests to increase your timer as well as your combo timer, and try to get the highest score as possible. If you've played Mercenaries before, you know exactly what you're in for. But this game does do two things that spices up the formula a little bit. Mainly, there's going to be a total of 2 missions where instead of just letting the timer run out or you killing every single enemy on the map, you need to kill a special target. Mainly this thing from, I think, the 4th mission of Resident Evil 5, but I have a special story that I want to share about these missions at the end of the video, so I'll talk about them last. And the one thing that this game does to spice up the Mercenaries formula a little bit is that along with selecting the character you want to play with, you're also able to customize them with 3 different perks to give each of them a little bit of an edge in combat. This can be stuff like getting your health back after killing an enemy with a critical attack, to just doing stuff like improving your gun handling. And it seems to me that these skills also have levels to them which you can level up by completing more stages. I didn't really notice all too big of a difference by having these things equipped, but I guess they're a cool little addition anyway. And I guess the only real thing that we need to talk about are the characters. So each of the 8 characters in this game will have their own loadout specific to them, so it's really up to preference as to which one fits you best. Another thing that I really want to highlight here real quick, but I sadly wasn't able to experience in-game, is there's this separate menu called weapons. So I have no idea if this is a case where you can equip one character with another character's loadout, or if you can just freely customize your loadout to your heart's content, but like I said, I sadly wasn't able to test this out, but that doesn't really matter all too much. I was able to beat this game no problem. Also, just to add this as well, there's also the separate menu where you can also at the very least equip the characters with alternate skins, so I guess that's pretty neat. So what do our favorite Resident Evil characters bring to the table? Chris has his trusty handgun, shotgun, and a bolt-action sniper rifle. Jill brings an AR knife and shotgun. Claire has a pistol, grenade launcher with shock rounds, and a semi-automatic sniper rifle. Rebecca brings a submachine gun and a grenade launcher armed with flame rounds. Hunk brings himself to the fight because he fucking scares me, and the weapons that he uses are a pistol, a grenade launcher armed with flash rounds, and an AR. Barry also brings in a pistol, another semi-automatic sniper rifle, and his so sexy revolver. Krauser has his bow that has infinite ammo, his knife, to which he apparently has a weakness to, and a rocket launcher for when you're really tired of the enemy shit. And finally, Wesker also has a pistol, a Desert Eagle that really wrecks enemy shit, and his triple barrel shotgun, which is enough to make any gun enthusiast erect. And as you can also expect, each of them have their own finishing moves that you can do whenever you stagger an enemy. And these are all cosmetic to each character, so I don't really think they're worth getting into all that much over here. But now with all of those things out of the way, what do I think about this game? It's really good. Yeah, no shit. I would actually go out of my way to say that before we got succeeding games in the series that also had the Mercenaries mode, I would go out of my way to say that this was the most definitive way to play this mode. It mainly has to do with the fact that this game brings in the awesome maps from Resident Evil 4 and 5, with the addition of being able to move and shoot at the same time that just makes everything so damn satisfying. And the fact that all of this came from a handheld that is about a Java game level power of an Xbox 360 and a PS3, it's definitely something that you have to commend Tosei for after their misstep with Survivor, which I have mentioned I actually enjoyed, but it's objectively clear that they did a good job here. That is until we get to the final mission of the game.
Yes, I did indeed say that I do have a story that I need to share here with everybody, because while I was really having a lot of fun playing this game, this final level is probably the most pissed off I've ever gotten playing a Resident Evil game.
Now, why did this final level specifically piss me off? Well, it has everything to do with the whole idea that there's a total of 2 levels where you need to kill a big-ass BOW in order to beat a stage by killing as many enemies as possible. Now, I would like to preface something here real quick. I personally think that this stage is completely designed like ass, and it goes against the entire fun factor that this game mode was originally designed for. But I'm also 100% willing to say that I'm just coping here. And if I probably was playing this on proper hardware, maybe it wouldn't have been such a humongous pain in the ass. But I also feel like if I did play this on OG hardware, my Nintendo 3DS would probably have gone the exact same way of every iPhone durability test video there is on YouTube. Now allow me to begin. So the stage is set in one of the mine areas, and everything was progressing fine. The game finally started you off with a bunch of zealots as well as one single executioner Majini, with the second one following after. And everything was going fine until this fucking message popped up. Now I was already thinking that this wasn't too huge of a problem, until you realize that the Majini spawns are infinite, and there's usually 2 of them. And need I remind you that their hammer swings are enough to get you to critical in 1 hit. Couple that with the fact that the fucking BOW you need to kill is armored and can only be dropped by stronger weapons and explosives, while you're still trying to avoid the normal enemies and the Majinis, this entire level took me close to fucking 2 hours to beat, because either I wouldn't have enough ammo to take the thing out, I reloaded way too slowly and the thing immediately got its ass off of the ground, meaning that I needed to try and find a new way to hit its weak spot, all while trying to avoid the fucking Majinis and their bullshit one-shot crap, all while this stage was too fucking cramped for you to properly maneuver around, and with so many other hazards that can fuck you over, because this game has a weird problem where explosive seems to still knock you down while you're fucking 7 miles away from them. On my ranking scale, I originally was about to give this game an 8.7, but after this one sack of shit mission, I had to drop it down to an 8.4 because everything up until this point was really damn fun, but with this mission, I was convinced that the mindset was to just spam all the hardest enemies while giving you a bullshit stipulation you needed to complete before time runs out. Seriously, fuck this level. But besides that, this game was still great. It took the core aspects of the Mercenaries game mode, improved it by virtue of just letting you move around and shoot at the same time, giving you the most control you've ever had in the series up until this point, and all of that on a handheld where you were more inclined to play shit like Super Mario 3D Land. I'm really happy with what Tosei was able to accomplish here, and it's a shame that a concept like this was never really revisited in the series in a different way, or how this game wasn't ported to modern consoles as just some cheap digital-only title. But hey, if you have the means to give this game a go, either through original hardware or in ways that'll piss off a shitty company, then I'm 100% giving it a go, because this game, it's something special in the broader world of Resident Evil.
But yeah, if you're anything like me and you're a Resident Evil fan, I would 100% recommend giving the Mercenaries 3D a go. Like I said, it's kind of sad again. Just like in the last video, it's kind of bittersweet. The fact of the matter that we got such a good game out of this, but no one decided to pick up the mantle. This is once again what I'm trying to say. Why don't we just get a multiplayer-focused entry into the franchise where it's just Mercenaries? I think that would have worked out so much better than Resistance. It would have worked out so much better than Reverse. It would probably be the only one successful thing that Capcom would be able to do if they wanted to bring multiplayer into this franchise. But regardless, this is what we have left, so I guess we're just fucked anyway. Everything else was at the very least really good. But any case, if you guys have enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. If you guys disliked the video, then Nintendo will be giving you a cease and desist order in due time, so don't worry about that. If you guys want to help support the channel, you can do so by either becoming a channel member or becoming a Patreon. And speaking of that, special thanks to top tier channel member and special thanks to top tier Patreon supporter, Mr. Aftonboy and a Panda in Space. I've been John from the channel with the freakishly long name, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye!